U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has filled out his list of core cabinet positions for the administration, including some key names that will help push forward his vision on defense and foreign policy. It all comes at a time of heightened geopolitical risks. Two major conflicts appear to have no signs of resolving themselves. Joining us now with more is Roman Schweizer, Managing Director at TD Cowen Washington Research Group. Great to have you with us, Roman.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, so we have a return of Donald Trump to the White House. What do we think foreign policy will look like in that administration?
Well, it's been advertised as a sort of Reagan-esque return to peace through strength. And I think, given the folks that we've seen, nominated or intended to be nominated for various positions, I would say it's a somewhat traditional Republican foreign policy with some of the American first instincts thrown in there in terms of trying to resolve the conflict in Europe as well as conflicts in the Middle East. But again, I would kind of say the idea is a strong military that isn't used a lot. If you look at the Republican platform from earlier this summer at the convention, it talks about having the strongest and best equipped military in the world. But it also talks about fostering peace globally and resolving a number of these conflicts that you mentioned. So I don't anticipate a decline in spending, but I do perhaps anticipate a decline in some of the assistance and aid that the U.S. provides around the world for some of these ongoing operations.
Okay, so interesting peace through strength. There's a lot obviously happening on the planet right now. Let's start to break those conflicts down one by one. Top of the agenda, or at least near the top, must be the Russia-Ukraine conflict. What do you think is going to happen? What do you see happening in that situation?
Yeah, so I think clearly one of the things that you've got Senator Marco Rubio nominated, certainly as Secretary of State, Mike Waltz, Congressman Mike Waltz, as National Security Advisor. Neither of these two are particularly guys that are soft on Russia or necessarily want to abandon Ukraine. I think they will push forward with the president's desire to negotiate a ceasefire or halt to that campaign. And I really think you've seen some of the weariness on both sides, whether it's the Russians or the Ukrainians, right? The Russians now using North Korean troops and even Houthi troops from Yemen to sort of avoid a general call up in Russia to avoid some political pressure. And then, of course, the Ukrainians themselves are pretty worn out, right, from this conflict. So I think there is an idea that there is a deal to be had sometime next year. And it's just a question of what do the outlines of that peace look like and how is that guaranteed?
When I think about the conflict, and obviously NATO has been a part of this in support of Ukraine, NATO, you get the sense that Trump hasn't been the biggest supporter. With the return of Trump to the White House, what does that relationship look like between the United States and NATO?
Well, I think most of his advisors would say, and I think even the vice president himself or Vice President-elect J.D. Vance has said that the U.S. would not withdraw from NATO. Of course, that's a Senate-ratified treaty, so it's maybe not as easy as that. But Trump has clearly been about encouraging the allies to spend the required or suggested 2% of GDP on defense. Some of them in closer proximity to Russia are spending way above that, like Poland at 3.5% per year. And even the new NATO Secretary General has said that NATO spending needs to increase. So there's certainly no shortage of acknowledgement that NATO needs to do more to pick up the slack. And I think that's what sort of President Trump's underlying message that does resonate with Republicans and Democrats alike, is that allies globally, whether that's in Asia, such as Taiwan, or certainly in NATO, need to do more in terms of burden sharing. And so I do expect that to be a focus in the years ahead.
Is that something that those NATO countries, including Canada, need to pay more attention to? Because obviously it's been a concern of Washington's for a while, and Canada has not stepped up its spending. They need to take this seriously under a Trump administration?
Yeah, I have to say Prime Minister Trudeau did not win himself any friends when he was here in Washington over the summer and announced that Canada would get to 2% of GDP by 2032. and that has certainly not been lost on Republican members of Congress either. So, look, I do think that those are the kinds of examples where whether it's from the U.S. economy standpoint in terms of the U.S. debt and annual deficit, we're paying, 3.2% of GDP on national security. And that, in some cases may not even count some of the extra money, emergency supplemental that we spend. So I think, particularly as the Trump administration focuses on other economic issues, they're going to want allies to increase their burden sharing.
Okay, let's talk about another conflict. Obviously, it's been ongoing for a while in the Middle East. Concerns about escalating tensions, whether Iran gets pulled in a more fulsome way. What does that look like when Trump returns to the White House?
Yeah, so I really think that's going to be one of the regions that's going to have perhaps the biggest change from the Biden administration policy. There has been a sense to allow Israel to do what it needs to do to, quote, finish the job, as certainly some Trump administration folks have said, or Republicans in the Senate. So there is, sort of broad support for Israel. As we're discussing this right now, there's talk that, a ceasefire deal has been reached between Israel and Hezbollah. So that may downshift tensions a little bit there. But I think the larger question for the Trump administration and allies in the Middle East is going to be Iran and its nuclear program. Right, the Iranians, there's a court case, or the FBI has filed charges against a national who's reportedly going to try to assassinate President-elect Trump, as well as probably, I think, some other members, perhaps like a John Bolton or Mike Pompeo, were on that target list. There's certainly no love lost between President Trump and the Iranian regime or the IRGC. And it's also a much different sort of view from the Trump administration than the Biden administration toward the Saudis and Mohammed bin Sultan. So you could certainly see the Trump administration trying to revitalize the Abraham Accords, trying to seek a broader regional peace, and really the Israelis being in a position of having, for one way or another, focused on their own near security vis-a-vis Hamas and Hezbollah, now looking at that broader regional threat of Iran, to which the Trump administration, Saudi, and other GCC countries would be looking to resolve. And just for added benefit, you can throw in Yemen and the Houthis, who, again, for the greater part of a year have been interdicting shipping around the Red Sea, and have proven to be quite effective in that regard.
I feel like I haven't left China a lot of time here, but in a minute, can we sort of break down perhaps, and it might be tough in a minute to break down perhaps what that relationship looks like?
Yeah, no, it's just the most complex relationship between the number one and number two economies in the world, and as well the largest militaries. I think we're going to see creative tension between sort of the economists, pro-business folks in the Trump administration. We're still looking at tariffs, but certainly don't want to torpedo either economy, particularly the U.S. economy. And then the national security folks who are quite worried long term about security of Taiwan, but as well our other allies in the region. I think we'll see that tension play out, but I think the trajectory of the relationship that was kind of established in 2016 is going to largely continue.
Well, we talked about the no shortage of geopolitical risk. Let's focus now on U.S. policy and defense spending. Now, you're saying we're going to see the biggest strategy shift in 40 years. What are we looking at?
Sure. I think maybe we have a chart we can kind of look at, and I think to me it's really since the 1980s, when largely the U.S. military was built for the Cold War. The Cold War ended, and then really in the early 2000s, the global war on terror began, and there was not a major change or major demand signal for really the evolution of high-end technology. That has changed now with the emergence of China and Russia as geopolitical challengers. And you've seen a whole change in both historical platforms, such as the nuclear triad, right, which scary to talk about, but ballistic missile submarines, intercontinental ballistic missiles, and long-range bombers, and then more modern technologies, right, such as missile defense systems, hypersonic weapons, directed energy, robotics, and unmanned systems. and even, of course, to more modern dual use technologies, commercial systems like AI, cyber, and quantum. So these are really going to be pushing the boundaries in the years ahead. And I think we've seen some of that emerge, perhaps even in Ukraine, right? The use of Starlink, the use of first-person drones, the use of unmanned naval systems to attack the Russian Black Sea Fleet. So this is something that I think DoD is really investigating, experimenting with, and you're starting to see the spending pattern shift over the last several years in particular.
A lot of what you're saying there sounds like it's going to be reliant on high tech, which is not cheap. We also know that a Trump administration is going to be facing, a large spending plan, concerns about racking up debt and the deficit. How does defense spending play in with that backdrop in Washington?
Yeah, well, certainly, if anyone's on social media or pays attention to Elon Musk, there's a Department of Government Efficiency, which he and Vivek Ramaswamy will be leading to sort of look at efficiencies across the federal government, but also across DoD. Elon has taken a tweeting about the F-35 fighter over the last several days, and certainly people have noticed that. But I think one of the things that a lot of folks look at is one, are there efficiencies within the U.S. federal government, within the Department of Defense, that makes sense in terms of freeing up spending for some of these higher priorities areas? Just simply to get out of the buggy whip business and to get into some of these more modern technologies. And I think we'll start to see that over time. Again, it's going to take a determined effort, but there are certainly areas, particularly within Musk's sort of domain, AI, the adoption of AI across the federal government, cyber, the advancement of quantum technologies, and things like that could have a huge payoff. And then even smaller technological advancements in space, weight, and power, and future materials can certainly play a role as well.
So when we talk about this generational shift in strategy, we take it back to the real economy. What companies are we thinking about when we talk about this kind of defense shift?
Yeah, well, certainly it is a massive market, right? When you're talking about, roughly under a little bit under $1 trillion in defense spending. So certainly there's the large cap traditional defense primes, the government services companies, but you also have a new generation of sort of venture capital backed non-traditional defense companies like a Palantir or Anduril or Shield AI, and others that are competing in some of these new areas very vigorously, and are also counting on some DoD reforms to sort of buy things smarter or be able to bring to market products that are developed in the commercial world, that have dual use or military applications that can be onboarded for, again, defense purposes. And I think you've seen that highlighted, whether that's in Ukraine or whether that's in the Red Sea, some of this rapid technology adoption that companies, that these newer, more nimble companies can bring to market.